All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shauna Hirschfield. I am Hamilton class of 2006. I work in the Career Center and work closely with the Hamilton Career Network, which launched just last year to help connect alumni with other alumni and with students and community members around their career interests. So we're really happy to have you here tonight for tonight's Hamilton Career Network event, talking about applying a liberal arts degree in the high tech industry. You should have been muted upon entry, but you have full audio and video privileges, so feel free to unmute yourself to jump into the conversation as you'd like. I'll be monitoring the chat window throughout, so you can type any questions there. There will also be a more kind of formal Q&A toward the end of the session, so at that point you can type questions into the chat or just unmute yourself or raise your hand to jump into the conversation. I'm also going to ask everyone in the room to please change your names if you haven't already to be your first and your last name and also your class year if you could. That way we know who's here in the room with us tonight. That would be great. So thank you in advance for doing that. I think we are ready to get started. So I'm going to hand it off to Julie Bernard, who's class of 1992 and is the leader for our STEM Hamilton Career Network and coordinated the event this evening. So thanks to Julie for your efforts to make this event possible, and I'll hand it off to you.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Shauna. Hi, everyone, wherever you may be, whether it's evening or afternoon, not sure of our time zones, but we're really happy that everyone joined us here today. And a little bit of humor for all of you and humble disclosure for me. Our session description was originally called The Death of Liberal Arts, Long Live Liberal Arts. And you gotta love it when you spend the weekend with your 11-year-old nephew who informs you that I had the phrase wrong. And he said, Julie, it should have been liberal arts is dead, long live liberal arts. He said, and he went on to tell me that they had just learned about French history and the ascension of Charles VII to the French throne back in 1422, and I had the phrase wrong. I'm like, how do you know that at 11? How embarrassing. So in case any of you were planning on calling me out on my error, I was a government major, not history, but close enough. And it's been a while. But anyway, thank you all truly, as I said, for joining us. I'm excited to explore this topic. I'm joined by Emily Winters and Christine Bauer to really talk about the relevance of our liberal arts education in a world that really is obsessed with all things big tech, whether it be education tech, fintech, med tech, ed tech, martech, HR tech. I feel like you name it, everything has kind of a little tech after it. And as a little background for setup, I'll share the story of what initially inspired tonight's panel topic. Well, as I mentioned, my own degree is in governance and sociology, and my career since school has been dominantly in retail. I've always been leading teams and various business efforts in both data science and technology initiatives that are designed to inform and really inspire positive consumer experiences. And I know from the success I've had in my career, I know firsthand that my own liberal arts degree definitely, there's no question in my mind, has contributed to my success. A lot of the skills that I honed in on and developed and nurtured in that context. But I also know, particularly having spent the past 5 years in a late stage tech startup, Valley-based tech startup, that the world really is obsessed with engineers. And I remember years ago while working at Macy's, and we were spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars with Facebook. I recall a time when Mark Zuckerberg actually took a lot of heat. I know he always does, but in this context, we'll go with this story, for saying that the only employees who were worth anything were engineers and all others were overhead. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, because I couldn't find the specific piece because it was probably back in 2011 or 12. Yet, as I mentioned, having recently worked myself for a late stage tech startup for about 5 years, I do know too well the narrative and the challenge that a liberal arts education is not considered necessarily to some as relevant or helpful in achieving success according to definitions of some in today's modern world. So in brainstorming with Shauna, the extended HCN team for our event series, we were inspired when really both Emily and Christine stepped up to help us explore this topic tonight through the lens of their own amazing experiences. And so my hope at the end of our session tonight is that you will be inspired and kind of continue to celebrate your own liberal arts degree as a substantive and meaningful strategic asset. So without further ado, I'd love to get straight to intros. And I've always said we are best at representing our own brands. So I'm going to ask Emily to introduce herself first, and then Christine, I'll go to you. And maybe if you would start for everybody, a little bit of context as well with your degree, and then how that has immediately started to translate into the career.
Sure, great. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I see some familiar faces in the audience and some new people that I'm excited to speak with you all tonight. So I was a part of the class of 2014 at Hamilton. I graduated with a major in biology and a minor in theater. And I really graduated not knowing what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go get my MD. I didn't want to go get a PhD. And as a biology major, those were kind of the two options presented to me. So as I took some time to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, I got a job working at the Center for Cellular Immunotherapies as part of the University of Pennsylvania. I was doing research on chimeric antigen receptor or CAR T cell therapy, which is a treatment for primarily right now for cancer, but can be used to harness the power of the immune system to treat many different things. And it was at that job that I kind of discovered biotech as a field because the lab that I was working with pharmaceutical and biotech companies to help bring this new therapeutic to the market. So I decided to take that and see where that would lead me. And I didn't know anything about biotech. So I figured what better place to learn than to go back to school. So I got my master's degree in biotechnology with a focus in business from Georgetown. And since being at Georgetown, I have worked in small biotech companies, specifically companies focused on gene therapies, which are one-time treatments for inherited diseases. I spent the past 3.5 years at Spark Therapeutics, working as part of their clinical operations team. So managing the logistics and execution of clinical trials. And I actually just started a new job today at another small gene therapy biotech company in Philadelphia called Passage Bio, where I'm also doing clinical operations. So that's me. And again, very excited to be here.
That's awesome. Thanks, Emily. And you are truly a trooper for starting with us or joining us tonight after your first day on the job today. So thank you. Thank you so much. If ever there's a kindness and generosity of volunteer spirit, this is it. Christine, I'd love to move to you because Emily has a specific degree in a STEM discipline, even though it's from a liberal arts institution, yet your pathway is a little bit different. So why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, very. So I double majored in creative writing and philosophy at Hamilton. I was kind of an art room nerd in high school, and I really did want to be an art major, but I was also from kind of a working class background. I had 2 younger siblings, and my mom really insisted like I had to major in something practical and not sit around and draw. So the something practical I decided was that if I could write well and I could think well, that would, give me a leg up in the world. So that was how I approached choosing my double major. I graduated in 2000. And I was just kind of a giant nerd who loved school. So I wanted to keep going to school. I wanted a master's degree, but again, it wasn't really financially in the cards. So what I did was I started applying for jobs at colleges and universities that allowed you to take classes as an employee perk. I applied at like Boston College, Boston University, MIT. I got hired at Harvard Divinity School by Wendy McDowell, class of 88, 89, to help work on a Harvard academic journal. At the time, the editor-in-chief said, there's this thing called the internet, and we should probably put some content from the magazine on it. So I took sort of like my art skills, the fact that I'd been, using Photoshop to make like chapbooks and band flyers for my friends. And this new thing called the internet that my job was going to pay for me to take coding classes, and started working on graphic design for the academic journal, for the newsletter, for web stuff. And eventually, that turned into a job as a digital content strategist at Harvard Business School. I finally earned a master's degree, not an ALM in creative writing, but rather a master's in information technology and instructional design through Harvard Extension School in 2012, at which point I moved to the Bay Area. My husband said, then boyfriend, now husband, said, take your master's degree and you can go work at Facebook or Google. And I was like, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. No one will ever hire me. But they did ultimately. I did eventually spend a couple of years working at Facebook in the global business marketing team, where we like to say that we paid the engineer's salary.
Exactly.
In revenue for the company. And I've also worked at LinkedIn. I taught code at General Assembly, and I'm currently sort of freelancing. My first client is Shopify. So I'm working for them right now, helping them to build technical training for non-technical employees.
Awesome. Well, thank you not only for your introduction, but for also setting up and seeding some of the skills that I think are relevant and pertinent to our topic today that we're going to explore. You mentioned, kind of your guiding philosophy. And by the way, you were thinking about it and planning it way more than I was at that time. So kudos to you when you were mentioning write well and think well, informing your path forward with creative writing and philosophy. And then Peter Lotto, thank you for mentioning your IBM experience with music, philosophy, and Russian lit majors, not comp sci or business, back in the day. So I love that we're starting to touch on the skills.
Julie, I interviewed with IBM way back in 1975, and I asked them, why are you talking to me, a religion major? And they said, you know what? We like religion. We like, poli-sci. We like Russian lit. We like music, because you guys know how to think. Yes. You know how to write. You know how to work through a problem. We can teach you the IBM way of doing things. Yep. Now, what I didn't say to you in the chat is I ended up with a 40-year career in IT.
Yes.
Which made perfect sense, of course, to everybody, including Jay Williams, my advisor, who said that, well, this was like 1978 when computers were kind of weird. He said, well, computers are kind of based on magic and faith, which is what we teach in the religion program. But the key is that liberal arts majors bring something to the table that those trained in the business or engineering disciplines do not.
Yes.
Is the ability to think, write, and be very, very creative in their thought process.
I agree. And, it's interesting that I love that you're sharing this story. So thank you so much from your experience in 75 and 78, because I think what we're seeing is that this tension of the relevance of a liberal arts degree still exists. And again, because I've been working in late stage tech startups myself, I've been hearing it for, the past 5-10 years myself. And there was a book written in 2017. It was a new book published by George Anders, and it was entitled, "You Can Do Anything: The Surprising Power of a Useless Liberal Arts Education." And the book came out of, actually evolved after he had penned a cover story for Forbes on the demand, actually, for liberal arts majors at tech companies. And when he had penned that Forbes cover story, he'd received just a torrent of responses from readers. And in his words at the time, he said that he realized he had found a big uncovered story, which is interesting because here we are in 17 at that time talking about it, and it's clearly an experience you were having long ago. But the basis of his argument, as you were talking about, Peter, was that young professionals with a liberal arts education really knew how to sell and how to humanize. And ultimately, folks with the liberal arts degrees make tech better and stronger. And in particular, he covered in his book then that big tech needed candidates that had the following qualities. So I'm going to read for a minute so I get these 5 right. They needed to have an eagerness to tackle uncharted areas, an ability to solve murky problems, well-honed analytic methods, keen awareness of group dynamics, and finally, an ability to inspire and persuade others. And this was, the basis of his argument that, a liberal arts education was actually truly a strategic asset. So Emily and Christine, back to each of you. I'd love for each of you to explore this with us from your perspectives. Do you agree with this list of qualities? And, what others would you perhaps from your own experience add to it? Really what other twist do you have on this argument that liberal arts makes tech better and stronger?
Yeah, I think that those list of qualities are pretty comprehensive. I forget, it's been a long day, so forgive me if there was also about communication, but what I've found is that it's always seemed so surprising to me that these qualities aren't innate in everyone. And going into the working world, and especially kind of gaining confidence in my ability as an adult and someone who is capable of having a job one day happened at Hamilton, where I was surrounded by everyone who is in the liberal arts, and Hamilton definitely attracts a certain type of student who is inquisitive, who knows how to communicate, and that's drilled into us on how to write properly and communicate well and get your thoughts out. So it's funny to me that this argument is still happening, because I think that there is so much benefit to these skills that are actually something that you gain during college, and not just, oh well, everyone has it or this certain type of person has it. You really develop them as you age in this kind of academic liberal arts institution.
Definitely. I absolutely agree with all of that. I agree that the list is fairly comprehensive. Communication, and especially communication with like people from different walks of life, was something I really learned at Hamilton. Being able to, write and think clearly again. And yeah, just agreed.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you both emphasized and added to that list the communication angle. Because even the best, at communications, and someone certainly lauded for his great skill in the oratory, former President Obama, in his communication skills, had a misstep a number of years ago, back in 2014. Some of you might recall that he delivered a speech, and he took a pretty harsh jab at art history majors during his speech. And quite a number of people who studied art history took some offense. And so he ended up issuing an apology letter, ultimately to the University of Texas art historian Ann Collins Johns, because she had taken great offense, and she had actually written to him at the White House, and he decided to respond because he felt so badly about his jab. But he wrote in his apology letter that I pulled up this weekend, I thought it was interesting. He said, "Let me apologize for my off-the-cuff remarks. I was making a point about the jobs market, not the value of art history. As it so happens, art history was one of my favorite subjects in high school. It helped me take a great deal of joy in my life that I might otherwise have missed." So I liked the essence of, the point. It's Obama, he's a lovely person, but he took the time to even pen an apology letter. Yet, beyond the fact that art history exposure can help us appreciate the finer things in life, I'd love, Christine and Emily, for you to talk about how we should frame the strengths that are developed and how they're applied, more specifically. So the example to kind of, what your appetite or your creative juice is flowing here is, I have a close colleague and now friend who actually studied journalism at Columbia. He became an investigative reporter, and yet he pivoted his career a number of years ago, and he now runs a content program for a major trade publication for the digital advertising industry. And while his writing skills are unparalleled, but he's also really masterful at interpreting very complex advertising technology concepts and capabilities and industry challenges, but in very technical topics, yet expressing them in clear, engaging, really thought-provoking and interesting ways. So I'd love if you would share additional examples, whether your own or folks in and around you, where they took a specific degree and speak about how that degree really evolves into a successful career in tech, and potentially in a position that one might not expect. And Christine, maybe you could take the non-STEM degree perspective from a liberal arts college and how you find success in tech in either a non-tech role or a tech specific role itself? And then Emily, maybe you can talk to us about the STEM degree perspective.
Absolutely. So some of the best user experience researchers in the tech field that I've ever worked with are anthropology majors, because I think a lot of the practices of going to people learning how they use technology and how to build products based on habits and observation of people really like connects to what anthropologists do. I have a really wonderful friend, Cordelia Dillon, who studied, she was a computer science major at a liberal arts school. So more on the Emily side of the camp, but she used to say that she thought her, the fact that her degree didn't come from an engineering school made her a weaker developer than others. But what turned out to be her strategic asset was the fact that she sort of cares more about people than about code. And I find that, it takes an engineering major to say, can we build it? And a liberal arts major to say, should we build it? How should we build it? And to think about things like that. So in my specific field of instructional design and developing online virtual instruction, people come from all sorts of backgrounds. I love asking instructional designers like what they did. I have, people from journalism, anthropology, neurobiology, all coming to this field to develop things. So that's really exciting. Another thing that I love is for a while, I would go around collecting the majors of founders of tech companies. And so companies like Instagram and Pinterest and Kickstarter and Eventbrite and WordPress were all founded by liberal arts majors. And so I think in that way, like storytelling is really a strategic asset for people in business analytics and insights. You can say, what they used to say at LinkedIn was that data plus storytelling is an insight, and you use insights to make decisions and to pitch things and sell things. So those are all really, really important, tangible, strategic skills that liberal arts majors have that are differentiating for us.
Yeah, and Christine, I think you mentioned a really good point about the engineers know how to build it, but the liberal arts grads say, should we build it? Should we care about doing this? Because I think that as someone with a STEM background, that carrying that thoughtfulness still applies even when you are in a more technical role. I think, I mentioned today is my first day of a new job, and one of the projects I've been given is to take these cumbersome trackers that are very technical, full of lots of specific detail, and make it friendly for senior management to review. And I'm immediately looking at these trackers like, how did someone make this? I'm like, it's so, I would hate looking at this. And one part is it's a small company, people don't have time to necessarily spend developing these sorts of things, but immediately I'm like, we can do this, that, and that to make it easier to read, and caring about how people interpret things and making it easy. So I think that that's really important, even with more of a technical STEM background. And really, when you do have a STEM background, maybe less so for computer science. I'm not as familiar with that, but I know in the hard sciences and biology and physics and chemistry, if you continue on in those fields and even in tech fields, you mostly need a lot of upper education. It's just kind of a prerequisite to move along in those fields, which is, I have lots of feelings about that, and that's not the question. But so you can take a liberal arts background in doing something maybe biology related, something totally different, and combine that with maybe more of a technical degree, and can do so many different things. There's not just the specific technical thing within a tech field. One of my fellow classmates is on this call. Julie, when you mentioned, examples of using a liberal arts background, my friend Lisa is on this call. She's going to be so mad I called her out. But she was a creative writing and math double major, and I always found it so interesting that she went into edtech using algorithms, which, Lisa, I'm sorry, I still don't quite understand what you do, but she does communications, working with clients, and then can also understand these algorithms and how these programs work and everything. And I'm just like, who would have thought that someone could go do this as a career? So having that liberal arts background gives you such a vast experience.
Yeah, well, I love, again, both of you are, coming at some similar conclusions from different angles, which I love. Christine, when you're talking about the anthropologists, I love that angle and the empathy that comes from that. And Emily, you mentioning it as well, kind of caring, the word caring. And it is definitely the anchor point that you hear about all the time. And I don't know how many, many people aren't on video, but I would say a show of hands, how many people have watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
Oh, yeah.
If you haven't, it's a highly recommended movie review. And Lisa, we should talk someday. I did work in ed tech, so I very much understand your world. We can help translate for Emily. But if you saw that movie, one of the there were so many great founders and early folks for various social platforms. Yeah, there was one woman, I remember I forget her name, which one she was, if you guys remember. She went to Stanford, and she spoke about how worried she was that there was a lack of empathy coming out of Stanford and going in Silicon Valley. And she worried about that herself because she wasn't a liberal arts person, and she was very hardcore engineering. And she's like, who's gonna worry? Who's gonna care? And it really resonated with me. Again, that is my industry, so very directly. So I had a unique view on that documentary. We won't go down that rabbit hole. But I'd love to take the flip side of that. So, and what I mean is, so we're talking about the skills we bring that benefit the tech industry. But, how do we, within the work itself, how do we, really twofold, how do we leverage our soft skills? But then the second piece of it is, how do we gain and strengthen the more technical skills at the same time? And in particular, if, some of these more technical skills are not being developed or focused on or taught while in college, how do you, and maybe Christine, some of this is for you, but how do you catch up, if you will, once you enter the workforce? And, what advice would you give to those in higher education, honestly? So really two things, kind of how you caught up, and then what advice would you give to those in higher education that are thinking about their curriculum and seeking to support students with the skills necessary so they can have a successful career in any tech field? And, and be able to, quite honestly, jump in as Emily did today and be given work, right? I clearly have worked in corporate America for too long, where the whole first week is just, history of the company and a bunch of lunches. Definitely wasn't on day one being given hard projects. So good for you, Emily. But Christine, why don't we start with you, and then Emily, jump to you.
Sure. So, well, I mean, in my specific case, I sort of caught up to the hard skills by taking sort of night school courses through Harvard Extension School to build those skills. I also, took on side projects. I learned probably more about, print layout from designing chapbooks for friends who were poets as I did from working on the Harvard magazine. So there's that. And I was just always sort of trying to maintain being a lifelong learner. I think I had a really major breakthrough when it came to code. When I started teaching myself JavaScript, I was always sort of tried to stay front end, HTML, CSS, like it felt safer and more like designerly there. And the back end felt really like developer-y and engineering and a little scary. But my breakthrough was realizing that code isn't math. I was scared of the math. And I realized the computer does the math for you. Code is grammar. Code is language. And so writing a program in JavaScript is almost like writing this is the creative writing major in me right here. It's like writing a sestina or a sonnet or a villanelle. So if if you don't have the right number of syllables in a line, it's not a sonnet. Or if you don't have, the comma in the right place, the program's not going to run in JavaScript. So sort of like reframing things to be about, to sort of move them into my wheelhouse was a skill that was really, part of that. And I think having the liberal arts background helped me reframe things that way. Was there another?
What about the part two? What advice would you give to those who are developing the curricula for higher education and for college education to perhaps accelerate some of that learning, maybe while you're, in your undergrad, versus having to be a lifelong learner, which I hope we all are anyway, yet having to pursue additional education outside of that context?
Yeah, I mean, I was literally just reading the other day about, I don't know if it was the new school that's teaching courses on code as a liberal art. They're teaching like hypertext narratives and all kinds of like stuff like that at the intersection of art and code. Another, actually, Paul Graham, I read, he has an article, an amazing essay about hackers and hackers as coders, where he says, you learn how to code the way an artist, learns how to paint. You sketch things out and you frame it and you go sloppy. You don't just, code on the page. But I think this is a really exciting moment, honestly, because as someone who has been creating virtual education for top technology companies, primarily teaching hard skills. So, at Facebook, I was teaching things like, here's how to install the Facebook tracking pixel so that you can find out which of your ads are performing better. And at LinkedIn, I was teaching people, here's how to use the software that will help you sell to customers. This moment right now, where a lot of liberal arts colleges and universities have been forced to go virtual, I think is really interesting, because it's a moment where I think, people go, some people go to like LinkedIn Learning to learn how to like code or how to do this hard skill things. But I think there's a really massive gap in the market for liberal arts skills, because, people who, don't go to four-year colleges still like should get exposed to things like critical thinking and, strong writing skills and stuff like that. And so I feel like there's like a startup somewhere that someone should start that is, instead of, a coder boot camp, what does a humanities boot camp look like? How do you bring that campus experience and those sorts of interactions online? That's something that really excites me.
All right, I love that idea, and you should go protect that intellectual property before any of the other attendees here go and steal it, because it's brilliant. Emily, you went into your new job with your technical skills, yet you still have to refine them and apply them against a particular role, which is still different. So can you talk about how you kind of do that on the job development, and also the question about the advice to anyone in higher education who has an impact on the education for future students? And one quick thing for our guests, any questions anybody has, if you would, enter it into the chat, or maybe just, give me some sort of a message that I can ask it. I want to make sure that we get your questions in here today too. So Emily, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the technical skills, and I know I have this example of being in this new job, but I actually think more back to when I first entered the workforce post-graduation. Not a lot of people know everything. And at every new job that you go to, there will always be training that needs to be done. So you want to be in a place who will give you that and won't expect you to be 100% perfect right off the bat. I say, oh, I have all these new projects, but it's really me being like, oh, well, I've had experience doing something like this, so I can bring this, but I have to go learn about new diseases. I have to go learn about new protocols, way things are done. And there's always going to be the technical training, no matter where you progress in your career. Maybe once you're and the C-suite level, they'll expect you to provide the training to other people, or you switch over from more of that specialist single user role to a management role. And really at those points, it's going to be more of the soft skills that you're going to think about. I think specifically in preparing for this event and thinking about this question, in terms of Hamilton as an institution and professors or educators in higher education, I think a lot of what you can do to help students build technical skills and build these skills to get them into tech fields is to give them confidence in what they do know and what you can provide them. At a school like Hamilton in a science field, there's only so much Hamilton can provide you because it's not a huge research institution. That being said, things like the senior project or senior thesis, giving students ownership of a project, allowing them to explore interests that they may have, helping them find internships or connecting them to colleagues, whether that be in academia or hopefully with some of the newer professors that we have who may also have interest in industry, connecting them to your colleagues if they express an interest, I think is really important. I think specifically to experience of myself, one of my professors, I knew she had a colleague who lived in Philadelphia or who was doing research in Philadelphia, and that's where I'm from. And I wanted to go home for the summer. And she connected me with her colleague, and I got a research experience there, and I gained some technical skills over the summer. So there's a lot of opportunities. But again, just to circle back to the main point, I think the most important thing higher ed can do is give people confidence.
Love that. And I definitely agree. It's the, it's similar to even what Peter had said in the chat. At Hamilton, we educated, other schools they train, and it's all about the critical thinking skills, right? Which is very similar to what you're saying, and the independent thinking, right? That it's not groupthink. It's really thoughtful. We kind of have assess the data and synthesize it and come to our own conclusions. I'd love to go to a question because I think Safa is a mind reader and knows the question I was intending to ask next, because it's a different angle on the same thing. So we'll go with yours, and I might add to your question. Here's our question for both of you. How do you best determine which job opportunities are a good fit for you based on their descriptions? Asking in terms of more entry-level roles. So think like your earlier career for both of you. And in other words, how do you get your foot in the door? And it's interesting, my question was something very similar. It said, anything unique in particular as relates to the interview process, how you have to sell yourself, how you approach networking and outreach. What did you need to do to find career opportunities initially, and how has that changed perhaps in more recent years, months? So thank you to Safa for asking a question, but why don't I hand it over to Christine first, and then we'll go to you, Emily.
A second.
There you are.
Well, I fell on the spot. I think a lot of it is just sort of knowing yourself, which, a liberal arts education is really good for helping you realize sort of like what you enjoy, what you're good at, your passions are, and where that overlap is. I think, you definitely have an advantage as a liberal arts major because you're probably a really strong writer and communicator. Cover letters, like always write a cover letter. And really, I think one of the things that has helped me stand out in my career is the ability to tell a story about my career. Specifically, when I mentor like up and coming designers and stuff, like I'll always try to pull out what their career story is in a way that even makes sort of, pivots and detours seem like, oh, that was meant to be. That's so compelling. Of course, you had to go from this role to that role. And so the ability to tell a really coherent, strong narrative about your career path and your career goals, and to connect all the various things you've done, even if they're in, disparate industries to sort of one defining feature about you is something that I've leveraged a lot to help find opportunities. So for example, I feel like I have had 3 careers. My first career, I was an academic copywriter in a communications office. And my second career, I was a web developer in an alumni communications office. And my third career, I was an instructional designer in high tech. So I went from academia to tech, and I went from design to, web development to instructional design, corporate training. But at the same time, there's sort of a through line there where in every role that I had, there was an element of, not only telling stories, but also an element of teaching. So when I was a digital communications strategist at Harvard Business School, one of the things I did was sort of owned everything that left the school online. So whether it was an email invitation to an alumni event or, the projections that were on the screen behind the dean when he gave a talk. Like I was doing all of it, like Twitter accounts and alumni newsletters. But, it went from realizing like, oh, the staff assistants who are either fresh out of college or grandmothers are sending out some like really weirdly formatted emails. So why don't I check in with them? And it started by sitting at people's desks being like, here's how to use the, email marketing program to make things like look nice and on brand and on template, to suddenly I was, doing monthly like brown bag lunch and learns where I was like, formally training people on how to use that system. So it's just a matter of finding like, something that, is a way to like tell your career story and make it compelling. That was probably a very long-winded answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, Christine, I actually jotted down quite a few notes while you were talking about the path thing and describing your path. As someone who is more recently out of college and is finally transitioning maybe out of the entry level and more into the I sort of know what I'm doing stage, no path is the same. And it took me a really long time to understand this, that there was no defined path that I had to take. And that everyone gets to a different place at a different time. And so your place where you are right then is no reflection on who you are as a person or your quality as a person. Or if you think, oh, well, I've been doing this one thing and I really want to do this other thing, you have these transferable skills. And Julie, it kind of goes back to your thing about the interview process and how you sell yourself as a liberal arts major and being at a liberal arts school. And I think, Christine, you mentioned always write a cover letter. I think also too, it's really important to tailor your resume for each job that you apply for, even if it is almost the exact same job. Hitting those keywords, knowing how to communicate in one sentence, maybe a huge project that you spent 2 years doing. And that kind of encompasses everything. And I think that's using your skills of communication that you get with a liberal arts degree. And then just 2 other points. What did I write down here? Don't be scared for not the perfect opportunity. That especially when you're entering and trying to break into the tech field. Christine, you mentioned, and I did the same thing. Right out of college, I went into academia, which seems like, there's pluses and minuses, and it's a great way though to gain maybe some more time to get those skills. And you'd be surprised, like people right out of college don't always go right into industry, and you're never allowed to get in if you don't do that. No, people take paths. And another point that you mentioned, Christine, that I wanted to reiterate in terms of this question is take advantage of any opportunity that presents yourself. I think as a liberal arts person, as you land that first job or that second job, there will always be opportunities that you develop as someone who is a critical thinker, that you're like, okay, there's a need here, let me own it and let me see what I can do. And that helps you build those skills so that when you're moving on in your career, you can say, oh, I did this thing, it's not that related, but it has a lot of the same transferable skills, those elements.
Yeah.
So I think, I hope that answers, I believe it was Sharon's question. The only other thing I think she may have mentioned was about what you look for in job opportunities. Don't be scared to apply for things that say you need X year of experience. Like, the job that I got said I needed like 6 more years of experience than I had. But really, when they see the right candidate who they can maybe adapt the job for, or they're a little bit too ambitious and thinking that someone's going to want to do this job that has 15 years of experience, there's always opportunities, and you never know who's going to see your resume. They may see it, think you're not right for that job, but they know something's down in the pipeline, and a recruiter remembers you.
Well, that's a good point on tech. Nobody actually reads your resume first. It's all AI. Every HR system, it scans through and does some keyword matching and whatnot. So go research that a bit. But I do think Peter, people have spirit animals. I think he's my spirit attendee because he wrote Networking Matters, and I couldn't agree more. And there's a data point back to Christine's story about storytelling that proves that out. According to Lee Hecht Harrison, which is the largest global outplacement firm, they report that 85% of jobs, no matter where you are in your career, entry level or more senior, are secured through networking. Only 10% are through executive recruiters. So now I'm up to 95 if my math is correct. The last 5% is luck of the draw through direct submission. And so if 85% is networking, you don't know where that network could come from. And I know someone in my own world who was once looking for a new job, happened to mention it to the UPS guy that was delivering a box because she was home one day when she was receiving, and she never used to be home. She was like, oh, I'm unemployed, blah, blah, blah. Would you know that the UPS driver knew somebody in her field and introduced her, and they had a coffee, and she subsequently got a job, and it was a very senior level position. So I love also, as Chris has said, and Emily has said, and everyone, you just never know where that opportunity will come from. And one last thing, Christine, I'd love to augment something you said about storytelling, because I couldn't agree with you more. I would advise you to storytell against their problems, not against your background. No one really cares on your resume or in your storytelling about just kind of the litany of like the work you did. That's just kind of job description-ish, or they want to know your accomplishments and how those accomplishments will be applied in helping them drive revenue or success, whatever success looks like. So definitely emphasize accomplishments when you're doing that storytelling and how you would apply it against their challenges. So we have another question. Oh, sorry, Christine, go.
Sorry, I just wanted to shout out my classmate, Chris Schuster, in the comments. And when Emily mentioned, Safa, that you shouldn't like wait for like the perfect opportunity and you can make your own opportunities. My first job when I was at Harvard, I was a staff assistant. I was like, filing and, changing addresses of magazine subscribers. That was the job description. And they needed some light copy editing. And then one day they were like, oh, we need to like hire a freelance graphic designer to make a poster. And I was like, I know Photoshop, I can make the poster. And by the time I left that job, I had like serious web development skills through job crafting and finding those pieces of the things that I could put my hand up for to build my own skills and to like add things to my resume. My classmate, Chris Schuster, was an art and math double major, which is such a Hamilton thing.
Yes.
Is theater and science. But those sorts of like really creative combinations. I remember Chris's, I want to call her Schuster. She's Christine Schuster and I was Christine Bauer in college. But she did these amazing, ginormous oil paintings that were based on like complex mathematical formulas of like the texture of it was beautiful work, but it was like based in hard science, and it was just lovely art. And so just shout out there. So like, you can make your own jobs, especially early in your career, especially if you just are really aware, as you were just saying, Julie, of like what the employers need, what their problems are, and how you might be uniquely positioned to solve for those.
Yeah, you do have to be, and I agree, Peter, it's all about solutions, not every statement of the problem. So for anyone who isn't looking for something, I'd expect to see a LinkedIn request from everybody who's attending here today. In the spirit of networking, I literally, this is a true statement, have helped place no less than about 10 to 15 people in jobs during this pandemic in the past 8 months, just through networking, helping others around us. And karma's a boomerang, so let's all connect and help each other out. Speaking of, you know, folks who graduated together, Lisa has a question, Emily, that she wants you guys to expand on. She is mentioning, you know, kind of going off of comments throughout this conversation this evening, liberal arts education definitely serves as an excellent foundation for growing into leadership positions in tech and elsewhere. She'd love to hear you expand on this idea. So Emily, yeah, why don't we start?
Hey, Lise. I think it kind of, if I'm thinking of the comment, I made a comment about, you know, transitioning to management or something like that. I think one of the things that I think about is, again, you have those skills that are difficult to teach because you gain them when you're this young, malleable mind in college. And in terms of critical thinking, in terms of thinking more strategy based and comprehensively, looking at the bigger picture versus maybe someone who goes down the route at a big research university and they gain all of these specific technical skills, they may not be able to extrapolate as much. And those are things that we're taught at Hamilton. And honestly, I didn't really appreciate this until, I don't know, maybe like 2 years ago. I mean, I've only been out of Hamilton for 6 years, but those first few years, I was kind of like, oh, I feel like sometimes I wish Hamilton taught me more of these specific things or had this specific opportunity or connected me to this opportunity through the Career Center because I didn't know it existed. And now that I've found my way, which was scary to do on my own, I've realized that there's a lot more to the Hamilton degree and a liberal arts degree that I will be able to bring with me forward as going into more leadership roles. And again, I think it speaks to what I said earlier about confidence, taking leadership and ownership. Also knowing how to work in a group. I know, you know, individualized thinking and having that strong background is important, but Hamilton really teaches you about working in teams and knowing how to kind of marry those technical skills with the more intangible skills that you're able to develop in a liberal arts background.
Awesome. Christine, we'll let you answer that one, and then I'll have one closing questions for you both. That'll be a tighter one for you to kind of give some advice to our folks. But Christine, why don't you talk about the leadership element a little bit more?
I think, you know, there were leadership skills I definitely developed at Hamilton, whether it was, you know, from, you know, being in extracurricular clubs, from tutoring and coaching at, you know, the writing center and places like that, from, you know, being forced to like get up and speak in front of classes and to, you know, defend points of view in classroom settings. Those were definitely experiences that were brand new to me when I came to Hamilton and that were really exciting.
Excellent. So we have only 3 minutes left. So let's let this be our speed round, perhaps. Time flies. There are about 10 questions we didn't answer or get to yet, because we're all going to be connected on LinkedIn. We can always pursue those later at another time. So my last question, and perhaps this is inspired by the fact that I've been doing way too much Peloton meditation during these pandemic times, yet one of my favorite meditations is always around gratitude. And I'd love to give you both the opportunity this evening to express gratitude to someone who has helped you in this journey of applying your liberal arts education to your successful careers, because you both have successful careers. And Emily, 6 years in, you're in, no longer entry level. Who, you know, to whom would you like to express gratitude, and maybe a word or two about why? Professors, advisors, mentors, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I express gratitude to my senior thesis advisor, Bill Fitch. He really gave me confidence in myself throughout that whole project. And I have quite a few of my Hamilton family on here. And My mom's also on here too. Hi, Mom. And I think it's really the support system that you develop. My friends through Hamilton, my family allowed me to go to Hamilton, allowed me to grow as a person at Hamilton and continue to support me post-Hamilton.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Christine.
I would like to express gratitude to the recently retired Rick Werner. I took 3 or 4 classes. I literally would just register for any class that Professor Werner was teaching in the philosophy department. I took a course with him spring semester. The first class I took with him was spring semester of freshman year, and it was one of the most challenging classes I'd ever taken. I'd always been a really strong and prolific and writer. But we had an assignment where every week we had to write a 200-word response to the assigned reading. And that was really hard for me. At the beginning of the semester, my first drafts would be about 1,500 words. And then I would spend twice as much time chopping it down to actually figure out what my main point was. So Professor Werner and that brutal and maddening assignment of 200 words a week really forced me to be, a much concise and clearer writer.
Have you ever gone back to reread those works?
Oh, they're probably in a box.
Oh yeah. So I was terrified. I was terrified because nothing has ever gone in the digital world, even though I graduated pre-internet. But I recently found my senior thesis deeply, deeply, deeply embedded, and I was horrified. And I won the award in government. I can't even. So as good as I thought I was, and as good as Hamilton clearly thought I was. So in the spirit of gratitude, I also would like to express my thanks and my gratitude, Emily and Christine, first and foremost to both of you. It has been my delight, not only this evening, yet getting to meet and greet both of you previously. I'm happy to have you in my world and to have been introduced to you by Shauna. So my thanks to Shauna and the Hamilton Career Network as well for sponsoring our event this evening. And also thankful for everybody who attended tonight and gave us an opportunity to share some data points, some perspectives, learnings from Emily and Christine, and to celebrate really these two women who are amazing. And they're just at the very beginning of a long and fruitful career. So thank you all. And like Chris says, we're going to connect on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And thanks also to Peter and Chris for sharing their gratitude in the chat as well, and for playing along. I appreciate that so much. So I hope, Shauna, I guess I'll pass it back to you in case there's closing elements, logistics.
No, again, just thanks to everyone for being here tonight. Thanks to our wonderful panelists and to Julie for organizing. I think this may be, and I probably shouldn't say this because it's being recorded, but I think this has been my favorite HCN event so far. So it's official, it's recorded, it's documented. So the recording will be posted online on our alumni events page. It's hamilton.edu/alumni/events/videos. So please check it out if you want to watch back or refer other folks to it. And also check out our alumni events page to see what other great events we have coming up. I know, Julie, you have one coming up in another week or two. Do you want to talk just briefly about that?
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, am I allowed to do a commercial for the next, the next program in our STEM series for the Hamilton Career Network? We will be focusing on sexism in science. And we have 3 women who will be sharing their stories with us, and they've graduated very different times and have very different experiences. So I hope, was it the 27th, yeah. Shauna or Emily? Oh yeah, and Emily has joined me as co-chair of the STEM program. So she is stepping in after we got to meet for this. She stepped up to volunteer with me. So after that, we'll be doing a series on the intersection of arts and STEM, actually, with Sudi Sito-Price, who also is another Hamilton grad 92. So we're looking forward to further developing out the program, and we hope you guys will check out the event calendar and stay tuned and join us again.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful night, and we hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, Sabina.